Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Jan Masaoka from the California Association of Nonprofits. Welcome today. We're expecting well over 100 people on today's webinar. I'm especially happy to welcome everybody here today because we have a couple of things that are important to know. As of 11 o'clock this morning, so breaking news, the application window for arts and culture nonprofits has been extended. It was due to close tomorrow, and we're really happy to announce that it has now been extended to September 30th. So that's really great news. And also to just let you know something about the importance of this program. So far, about 7,000 nonprofits have received grants from this program, totaling about 98 million. So this is a really significant program. It's not one of those programs where only just a few people get grant awards. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing so much effort on making sure that all the nonprofits in California get word about this and encouragement to apply if you're eligible. So just another word about CalNonprofits. I'm the CEO of CalNonprofits. We say CalNonprofits for short. And we're a statewide policy alliance of more than 10,000 nonprofits. And one of the things we do is to advocate for better relationships between nonprofits and government, more resources to nonprofits to serve our communities, for example, better contracting arrangements when we have contracts with government, and fair regulation that protects nonprofits' ability to do our work. And one of the things we like to do the most is get money to nonprofits, so that's why all of us on staff are really enjoy working on this particular program. And one reason why this program is especially noteworthy for nonprofits is that unlike many other grant programs, it prioritizes grants to those nonprofits in typically marginalized communities. So that means rural communities, communities of color, poor communities, arts and culture nonprofits, and small nonprofits. So it's kind of tailor-made for just the exact kind of nonprofits that are so important in serving our communities today. Just to let you know that this is just a little bit more word of about CalNonprofits, but I do want to emphasize that as a program partner to the California Small Business Relief Program, we are here to help you, and Sue is here. She actually answers the phone in person live. She's not like at the end of an endless menu of buttons that you have to push and get and circles and everything. And we hope that you will choose CalNonprofits as your partner organization. You do have to choose a partner when you go open the application. We hope that you'll choose us, although whether or not you choose us, we're happy to help you as well. And thank you, Lucy, also for reminding me that in addition, there's also closed captioning today, and you can choose that on the closed caption part of your menu. And I want to thank Chelsea Pete, who is our captioner today. All right, next slide. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started now. And Sue is going to be our main presenter, and Lucy is going to be kind of her interlocutor, asking questions, monitoring and parsing the questions from the Q&A box, and in general kind of helping make this more of a conversation than just kind of a unidirectional seminar. So, but please go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A box, and welcome everybody. And Lucy, let me hand this off to you.
Actually, I think we're going to start with Sue.
Right. Okay, Sue.
Yes, happy to start. So next slide, please. And just want to make sure everybody knows that they'll get a recording of the webinar by email. And we're going to put up my contact information and contact information for Lendistry several times. You'll see my email at the bottom of many of the slides. And as Jan mentioned, I'm delighted to hear from you with your questions if you don't get something answered today. Let's move on to the next slide, and we'll turn back to Jan for the poll.
Jan, you're on mute.
A little bit scrambled today, didn't realize I was on mute, forgot about the poll. So we want to know just a little bit more about you. So if you'll take just a second to let us know your application status, whether you haven't applied yet, whether you started one, whether you filled out the wrong application in earlier funding rounds, like you filled out the one for small business rather than for nonprofits, or whether you're on the waiting list or you're in process, okay? And then also just let us know what kind of help are you most likely to use. This helps us focus our resources on the best ways to help you, whether you would like to see additional webinars, detailed written FAQs, talk to an expert by phone, Not sure what choice 4 means here. Individual help walking through the application as you fill it out. So take a moment to do that. To fill out that form will take just a minute, and then let everybody know the results as well. Okay, and just wanted to just say a word about Sue for those of you who weren't familiar with her yet. In the earlier rounds, she spoke individually or emailed individually with more than 2,000 nonprofits. So she has a lot of experience in a lot of variety of questions that people might be asking. So I hope you'll make full use of her capabilities. Okay, Henry, can we take a look at the poll results now? Great. Okay, I have not applied yet. Wow, 75%. That's great to see. That really says that we're reaching new people who haven't heard about this yet. So I'm very happy about that. And what kind of help would you be most likely to use? So expert by phone, FAQs, and webinars. So I'm really glad to see that. These are things that we're really working on and updating literally every day. So thank you very much for those answers. All right, let me try this again. All right, Sue, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jan. And next slide, please. First thing we want to make sure everybody knows is that unfortunately there are some fraudsters out there duping people out of their information. And so we want everybody to know, whether you're starting an application or whether you've already applied, that everything related to this application is absolutely free. When you receive legitimate communications, take a look at the suffix on the address. They come from lendistry.com. And you can always get more information at Lendistry's website at careliefgrant.com. Next slide, please. We want to make sure that you know how to navigate through our website also to make sure you can locate the information you need. And here's a screenshot of our homepage. You'll see that blue box on the right that says California COVID-19 Relief Grant for Nonprofits Guide. You click on that white button, see our grant guide, and it will take you to our frequently asked questions, our webinar recordings, any current announcements, and program information sometimes from Lendistry sometimes is subject to change. So we recommend everybody check back there frequently. Next slide, please. We are now have actually 3 funding rounds going on. So let's take a moment to explain what those are. Round 7 is ongoing through September 16th, and it is not accepting new applications, but rather it is to process applications that are on the waiting list. Round 8 is for select arts and cultural organizations, and I use that word select because not all arts and cultural applicants will qualify for round 8, and it's okay if you don't. You can apply in round 9, but please go to our website and see our frequently asked questions, which will give you a list of those organizations that are qualified to apply in round 8. And as Jan mentioned earlier, we just got informed moments ago that while the original application deadline was today at 5, that has been extended to September 30th at 5 p.m. And we'll be talking most particularly today about round 9. Round 9 is for new applicants. So if you've never applied before, waitlisted applicants do not need to reapply because your application will automatically roll over for consideration. And round 8 applicants, if you're applying in round 8 as a nonprofit arts and cultural organization, we do recommend that you also place an application in round 9 using a different email address from your prior application. And for those who might have applied earlier and been denied funding because they filled out the small business rather than the nonprofit form, go ahead and reapply in round 9. And again, use a different email address from your prior application. Next slide, please. We're going to talk just a moment about current applicants, but this will apply to everyone because once you place your application, you'll become a current applicant. And we want you to know that you can log back in and check your application status at any time that you like. After you start an application, you'll receive an email from Lendistry with a temporary password and a link to your application. Watch out for that email and please keep it someplace because you can go back and click on that link anytime you want to log back into your application. You can only receive one grant from this program. If you have already received funding, we don't recommend that you apply again. You will not be successful. I mentioned that wait-listed applications automatically roll over to subsequent rounds, and so there's no need to reapply if you log in and check your status and see either on the waiting list or pending. So, and we've talked already a moment about the qualifying arts and culture organizations. We're going to go next to the next slide and talk a little bit more about how to check your application status. And one of the most important things is to make sure that you've filled out the correct application. All of the partner portals display more than one application. And so you can check which application you filled out at any time by logging into your, back into your application and looking for the code in blue. CRG indicates that you filled out a small business application. CRG NPO indicates that you filled out a nonprofit application. And CRG AC NPO indicates that you filled out either a round 4 or a round 8 application for those qualifying nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. And we have another reminder here, particularly for round 1 and 2 applicants. It was not very apparent to most people that there was more than one application available on the website. And unfortunately, many people filled out the wrong one. So if you applied in rounds 1 and 2, please do be sure to log in, check which form of application you filled out. If you filled out the wrong one, you do need to reapply in round 9 using a different email address. For those who are applying in round 9, it's very clear now which application is which, and you are unlikely to encounter that difficulty. Next slide, please. And here are the various application status messages that you might see when you log into your application. A waiting selection process or on the waiting list means that your application has not yet been selected for processing. This terminology can be a little confusing for folks. When Lendistry says that your application has been selected, it means that it has been selected for review, not yet that it has been selected for funding. So you might sign in and see a message that says incomplete. If so, you can go ahead and complete your application. Again, if you're on a waiting selection process or on the waiting list, no need to reapply. That will automatically roll forward. If you are selected pending validations, that means your application has been selected for processing and Lendistry is verifying your information. During this point in the application process, if Lendistry has any questions, they will contact you. If they don't have any questions, the next thing you will see is an email from DocuSign with a grant agreement. Once you have signed and returned the grant agreement, then you are on your way to funding. You'll see your status change to in closing or documents out for funding. And then, of course, once you are funded, you'll see that your grant has been funded, your status will change. If you log in and you see a message that says not selected, that means that your application has been denied, and you'll want to take a look at the reason. You should have received an email from Lendistry giving you the reasons why, although sometimes that is unclear to applicants. If you have questions, please contact me and we can talk that through. I noted earlier that you'll receive a grant agreement via DocuSign. Please be sure to monitor your spam, your junk filter for communications from Lendistry. Sometimes people miss that. The window to sign your DocuSign grant agreement is only 3 days. And if for any reason you miss that or you don't meet that 3-day window, you can always contact Lendistry and ask them to send it again. They'll do that. Next slide, please. Now let's talk a minute about who should apply. To review one more time, who should apply in round 9 and who should not. You do not need to reapply in round 9 if your status says on the wait list or awaiting selection process, and you have logged in and verified that you applied using the correct application form. If you do need to apply in round 9, if you use the wrong application form in an earlier round, if you are a first-time applicant, if you applied in either round 4 or round 8, but you haven't moved to funding yet, the reason is because you may not receive a funding decision from round 8. That is the one that is specifically for the arts and cultural nonprofit organizations. You may not receive that funding decision before the round 9 window closes. So we do recommend, if you're applying in round 8, to also place a round 9 application, again, using a different email address. I'll also mention that the link for round 8 that you use to apply is different from the link to apply for the other funding rounds. You do not need a partner in round 8. And you can get those links by visiting our website and clicking on our FAQs. And we should talk for a moment about what does it mean to be a partner. And as Jan mentioned, CalNonprofits is a partner in the California Relief Grant Program. And that means that it is our job to provide you with an application link as supplied to us by Lendistry. And it is also our job to be available to assist you and to answer questions. So again, please don't hesitate to contact me by phone or email if I can be of assistance. And before we go on to information for new applicants, and next slide, please. We're going to turn to Lucy and ask Lucy, do we have questions coming in the Q&A box?
We do, and I know you're going to get to some of the answers later, but there are some that I think would be good to answer right now. Can you explain the differences between the federal Paycheck Protection Program and this program?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I know that there are a lot of funding assistance programs out there, and people do sometimes get confused. So the Payroll Protection Program, or PPP, as well as EIDL, is a federal program. Sometimes I get the question about, can I apply for both? And the answer is yes, you can. You can apply for federal assistance. The California Relief Grant is a state program, and you can apply for federal assistance as well as state assistance, and you may even have some local assistance from your city or county. One of the big differences from the Payroll Protection Program is, however, that the PPP is structured as a loan program, even though many of those loans are being forgiven. The California Relief Grant is a grant. You do not need to pay it back.
Great. Thank you very much, Sue. We had one question that came in early. Somebody is concerned that they're getting some scammer emails, and I know you mentioned something about fraud at the beginning and something about Lendistry emails. Can you just address that again?
I'd be happy to. As I mentioned earlier, legitimate emails from Lendistry will have in their address at lendistry.com and their return address. Additionally, if you receive any emails, so for example, asking you to provide documents or your banking information, you can provide all of that by logging into your application and entering it there. You can upload any documents that are requested, and providing banking information is part of the application process because Lendistry does not send out paper checks. They will do a transfer into your bank account when you are funded. But the best way to keep control of your information is to provide it only through your application on the Lendistry site.
Thank you. And we are talking about rounds 8 and 9 now. We have a question about whether a nonprofit can qualify for both rounds.
The answer is that we are recommending, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that you place an application in both rounds. However, you will only be able to receive one grant. If you are funded in round 8, you will not also be funded in round 9.
You know, I think that's good for now. We do have a request for you to speak a little more slowly, Sue. Interpreters are asking us. So
I will try to do that. Thank you for letting me know.
I know it's a lot of information to cover. So
we do.
Okay.
We'll go on to our next slide now. One of the most common questions we get is, how much can I receive from this program? And the grant that you qualify for is based on the income that you report for your tax year 2019. If that income falls between $1,000 and $100,000, you're eligible for a grant of $5,000. If that income falls between $100,000 and $1 million, you're eligible for a grant of $15,000. And if you're $1 million to $2.5 million, you can get a grant of $25,000. I'll make a note that if you qualify for Round 8, there is no income cap in there. This program was originally conceived to assist small nonprofits and small businesses, but so there is an income cap of 2.5 million in Round 9, but there is no income cap for the arts and cultural organizations in Round 8. If we in nonprofits are used to telling folks how much we need and making a grant request, this program does not work like that. There is no narrative to your application. You won't have to be writing something lengthy. You simply select what you qualify for. And again, the way that they will be verifying your application is by looking at the tax filing that you provide from the 2019 year to determine that you have at least the minimum income of $1,000 showing in that year, and if applicable, that you fall under the cap. Next question, please. Let's talk about eligibility for a moment. Who is eligible to receive a grant? And I want to stress that you don't need to take a lot of notes or worry about writing this down. All of this information is in the FAQs on our website. And we have designed those FAQs as an application guide. If you take about a half hour to read through it and then gather your information and documents in advance, we estimate that you can get through placing this application on the website in under an hour. So eligibility, you have to be a 501c3, C6, or C19 in order to qualify. And you have to be a corporation, an unincorporated association, or a cooperative. I mentioned a moment ago that you have to have that 990 tax filing from your tax year 2019, and it has to show a California address. You have to have annual revenue that's within the range that I mentioned a moment ago. You also have to have been in operation on or before June 1st, 2019. This program is conceived as COVID relief for nonprofits. It is not intended to fund general expenses for nonprofits or for startup organizations. But I want to linger there for a moment because some nonprofit organizations might start up and start providing programs and services before they've filed for their 501c3 or their incorporation. And that is acceptable. If you can document that you were providing your programs and services on or before June 1st, 2019, but your tax exempt status and your incorporation is at a later date, it only needs to be current at the time of application. So that's an important nuance to remember. Moving on, you have to have a physical address located in California. Lendistry will do rigorous verification around the entity and the named applicant. And this is to prevent fraud in the program. One of the ways that they do that is by verifying that there is a physical address associated with the application. It does not have to be where you receive your mail if you're in a community that uses PO boxes, and that's discussed in a little more detail in our FAQs. You also have to have remained open during the time of COVID, or if you were not able to remain open, have a clear plan for reopening. And you had to have at least $1 in eligible expenses in the period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020.
So I'm going to jump in. Oh, sorry. Can I jump in with a couple of questions?
Please do, Lucy. Yes.
So we did have a question about 501c4s, and they are not eligible, I can see from your slide.
That's correct.
We also had a question about chambers, which I think fit in the 6 category. Can they qualify for the arts and cultural funding?
Unfortunately, that is, they are not one of the organizations that is included in the eligibility for round 8, but they can apply in round 9.
Great, thank you. And then we have some concerns about the income differences being focused on 2019. We have some participants who are saying that a lot of the effects that they experienced from the pandemic were happening later, more in 2020. Can you just address that a little bit?
I sure can. So again, what you're showing as income in 2019 is what will qualify you to be eligible for the grant and will also determine what level of grant you can request. We recognize, and Lendistry recognizes, that many people had extraordinary expenses as 2020 unfolded. However, the program guidelines are as they are written. They will look at your 2019 gross income in order to determine your eligibility within the range, if that's applicable, regardless of what you might be showing in 2020.
And then what does that mean if you're on a fiscal year?
Your fiscal year is not relevant in the sense that you file your 990 every year. Right up at the top, it's going to say your filing year. So you want to look for the one that says 2019, and it doesn't matter if your fiscal year is different from the calendar year.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more. Are CRG applications also being accepted, and what are the deadlines for those? So CRG applications that are not a nonprofit.
They have the same requirements and the same deadlines as the nonprofit applications. Round 9 is for both nonprofits and small businesses, and the small businesses need to show that 2019 income in the parameters that we talked about a moment ago, and they have the same filing deadline for the program, which is September 9th at September 30th at 5 p.m.
Okay, with the portals opening up tomorrow, September 9th, right?
It's true. The portal is due to open at 9 a.m. tomorrow for the round 9 application. I will note that in some of the prior rounds, it might not have opened until 9:15 or 9:20. So if you log on and it's not, and you can't quite get to your to an application form yet, just come back in a little while. It'll be open.
And then we do have a question again about the PO boxes. You are recommending that they select a street address because PO boxes are not acceptable, right?
That's right. If you can list any address that you might have, it doesn't have to be your office. It can be a staff member's home address or any other address that you have available that's legitimately associated with your organization in some kind of way. If you absolutely don't have that available to you, please see our FAQs because it's discussed. And I'll note also that Lendistry does not communicate with people via US mail. So you're not at risk of missing something that might be mailed to you. They will communicate with you via email.
Okay, and then just one more question for now. If somebody has submitted a past application, and I know you did answer this, but just to repeat it, I think people are concerned. How can they find out about the funding decision that was reached?
You can log back into your application and check your application status. We showed that a little while ago, the messages that are in red, and your application status will tell you what your next steps need to be. If you're confused about your application status, please reach out to me by phone or email. I'll be happy to talk it through with you.
Okay, I see that we have additional questions, but I know you have a lot of information to cover, so let's keep going for now.
Thank you, Lucy. And while we were talking about eligibility, I also wanted to make a note that you do not have to have employees in order to qualify for this program. All volunteer programs can apply and qualify, and that's different from the payroll protection program that we mentioned from the federal level moments ago. Because you need to be able to provide verification of your income as being in the range that's eligible, If you file the 990, the 990N, or the 990EZ, that appears there. If you're a smaller organization that files the 990 postcard, you will need some additional documentation because the postcard doesn't list your gross income. And that's discussed in our FAQs on our website, and we'll give you links to where you can obtain the additional documentation that you need. And let's move on. I'm sorry, I'm catching up with you. Let's talk for a moment about who is not eligible to apply. If you are a department of another organization, it is only the organization itself. An example of that might be if you are a program of a university or a multi-service organization. The parent organization can apply because they are the ones that file the 990, but unfortunately a department cannot. If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, likewise, those organizations unfortunately are not eligible. And there are some very specific rules that apply to religious institutions that I encourage you to read through in our FAQs. I will note that if you are a nonprofit that is not a congregation or engaging in religious activities, but rather is providing social services or other programs, you are not considered to be a religious institution. Being faith-based or faith-informed doesn't make you a religious institution. They're really talking about congregations. And I'll also note that any individual can file one nonprofit application and one small business application. We have many great business people who also devote their time to service with nonprofit organizations. And as I said, you can apply once in each of those categories. However, we do caution you to use different email addresses on any application that you might submit. Lendistry tracks applications through their system by virtue of the email address. And if you submit 2 applications with the same email address, you're at risk of getting flagged as a duplicate and having your applications discarded. Next slide, please. A couple of other requirements. You'll be asked to list one person's name on the application as the applicant, and that person has to appear on the statement of information that nonprofits file with the California Secretary of State. And if you're familiar with that form, you know there's 2 sections to it. There is one section where you're asked to name 3 of the principals in your organization, and there's another section where you're asked to name your agent for service. The applicant's name must be on the organization's statement of information as one of the 3 principals. If it can appear also as the agent for service, but if it is only listed as the agent for service, then you need to choose one of those 3 other people to be the applicant on your organization or for your organization. And we've already talked a little bit about the Form 990. I'll take a moment to note that this application is done completely online. You won't be submitting any paper. You will upload your documents as attachments to your online application. And I'll also say that if you have not yet filed your Form 990, go ahead and apply. Provide the 990 when you have it. We don't yet know what the final date is that Lendistry will accept your Form 990. But again, if you don't have that available, but you anticipate having it available soon, go ahead and apply. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about expenses for a moment because it's another qualification for the grant. We talked about the grant amount is fixed regardless of how many qualifying expenses you may have had, but you must have at least $1 of qualifying expenses between the period of March 1st and December 31st, 2020. And the qualifying expenses are regular expenses that organizations have. Think about a rent or a mortgage, payroll, insurance, utilities, things like that. The only requirement is that you cannot, what we call double dip, meaning that if you've already submitted those expenses for payment to another source or for funding to another source, you cannot also take that same expense and count it toward eligibility for the California Relief Grant. Let me give you an example. If you got a PPP loan and you use that to pay people in your staff in September of 2020, you cannot also count that as an eligible expense for this grant. However, you could count eligible expense as your payroll for October 2020. You can also count as an eligible expense anything that you needed to expend to cope with operating in COVID conditions. Things like if you had to install plexiglass somewhere or purchase personal protective equipment for staff, or even equipment if you had to purchase it in order to continue to operate in the COVID environment. The expense requirement gets a little confusing for people. As nonprofits, we're used to projecting our expenses and asking a funder to fund those things in the future. This grant is looking backward. And as I mentioned, there's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between the amount of expenses that you had and the grant amount that you can receive, because the grant amounts are fixed. So as long as you had $1 of qualifying expenses in that period, March 1 to December 31st, you are eligible to apply. When you receive your grant, you are not required to apply those funds in retrospect. By that, I mean you don't have to go back and open your books for 2020 if they're already closed. And if you receive funds in excess of what your expenses were, you can treat those as general operating expenses. Next slide, please. And Lucy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do independent contractors qualify as an eligible expense?
Thank you, Lucy. We're going to touch on that in just a moment. This application requires that you use Google Chrome as your browser when you are applying, and when you return to check your application status. If you use a different browser like Safari or some of the other ones, you're likely to return errors. And we have a lot more tech tips in our FAQs, so we recommend that you check there too. Next slide, please. In preparing for your, again, no need to write all this down. We've got it all on our FAQs, but to review what you need to prepare to get ready to apply, first you want to gather your documents. As we mentioned, your 2019 Form 990 and any additional income documentation if you file the postcard, your articles of incorporation, a current government issued ID for the applicant, such as a driver's license or passport. You have to have a photo ID for the applicant, and it cannot be expired. And then there is also something called the application certification form. This is a form that is available either on the Lendistry website, or you can find it easily by looking through our FAQs, and you just need to fill that out and attach it to your application. Not everybody will have or need the following, but if it applies to you, you'll also want to supply your state RRF-1 form or other income documentation if you're a 990 postcard filer. If you have a certificate of organization, a fictitious name registration, or a government-issued business license, you'll be asked for that as well. If you don't have them, they're not required. And let's go on to the next slide, please. The next thing you want to do is locate your gross revenue for 2019. You'll be asked to enter that into the application. For the 990 filers, that's on line 12. For the 990 EZ filers, it's on line 9. And there is a second gross revenue calculation that you need to do. It is not required that you show a drop in income in 2019 over 2020. However, priority will be given to funding those applicants. And one question on the application will ask you to provide your gross revenue from April 1 to September 30 in 2019 and the same time period in 2020. That is how they will determine if you had a drop in gross revenue. When you are calculating this part of your gross revenue do not include any other government COVID relief funds that you received. You will be asked to enter that on a different line. And if you were fortunate enough to receive funding from multiple government programs, there may not be enough lines in the application for you to list them all. So what you would want to do is indicate the largest, the source for the largest amount that you received on the application, and then enter the total amount that you received in government COVID relief funds, and then create a Word document that just lists what you've received and the amounts, and attach that to your application with any of your other documents that you'll be uploading. Next slide, please. Now we're ready to start your application since you've gathered your information. And you can do that in one of two places. Small businesses and nonprofits can go to careliefgrant.com if you'd like to take a look at all the partners that might be available to work with you. If you'd like to choose CalNonprofits as your partner, you can go directly to this link here, and don't worry about copying it down. It is in our FAQs and it is on our website. As Jan mentioned earlier, we are here to assist you no matter who you choose as your partner. The important thing to remember is which partner you chose and which link you use to get to your application, because you will return to your application later on to check your status or add documents by going to the same link. I sometimes get a call of people that say, help, I can't get back into my application. And my first question is going to be, who was your partner? Because that will determine the link that you need to use. So it's good to bookmark it or write it down somewhere. And now we're going to move into the application itself. I'll also note that don't try to get into the application today. It won't be live until 9 a.m. or so tomorrow morning. So that arrow is pointing to where it says click here to apply. That link is not live until tomorrow morning. The screen that you're seeing now is what you'll see every time you go to the application, whether it's to begin an application or whether it's to log in and check your status. If you're starting a new application, don't bother about the right side of the screen. Just click here to apply, and then you can begin an application. After you've already started an application, each time you return, you will go to the right side of the screen to enter your email and your password. As I mentioned earlier, once you've entered, whether you've completed your application or not, once you enter your name and email, Lendistry will send you an email that contains a temporary password, and you can go back in and change it to the one you'd like to use. And you can see there on the right, it says forgot password. Don't worry if you forget your password, you can always request a new one. Next slide, please. It's very important that you note that there will be more than one application displayed on the application portals. So please select the one for the grant program for nonprofits if you're a nonprofit organization. If you're a small business, you'll see a different color bar that says it's for for-profits, but Lendistry cannot process applications that were submitted on the wrong form. So you'll want to double check. Next slide, please. There are some features on the application that you'll see, including accessibility features if you need assistance for folks who have visual impairments. And on the right, it says select a language. Lendistry has recently added additional languages, so this is not a comprehensive list. But if you'd like to see the language, the application in a different language, that is available to you. Next slide, please. We want to linger for a moment on some of the questions in the application because they're a little foreign to nonprofit organizations. We don't typically see some of these questions. And so this is the first page of the application, and a case in point is it asks for owner details. We know that nonprofits don't have owners, as does Lendistry. So you should enter the name of the applicant, the name of the applicant as the owner, and remember that'll be one of those three people that's listed on your statement of information. Down at the bottom in the center, we see a red arrow pointing to a question that says, what percentage of ownership does the applicant have in this organization? Lendistry knows that nonprofits don't have owners, And you can enter 100% or 0%. Lendistry will accept both of those answers. Next slide, please. I want to talk for a moment about priority areas. One of the things that you can see here is a drop-down menu. Many of the questions have that little triangle next to them where you just select from a drop-down menu. There are some priority areas for emergency food and housing, for childcare, and employment and workforce development activities. And if you don't fall into one of those categories, simply select other. You are still eligible. It doesn't disqualify you anywhere in this application if the closest thing in the drop-down menu for you says other or unknown. It's okay to choose that. Next question, please. And here's where we'll address that question about employees and contractors. On this page that says, how can we help you? You'll see on the top left, the first question is the purpose of the grant. You'll be asked to say, is it payroll or is it rent? Those kinds of things. And you may be using your grant for more than one purpose. Simply choose the one that you're planning to spend the most on, and that's just fine. Some of these drop-down menus don't fit neatly into nonprofit organizations. And so, but you do have to fill in every field in this application. So go ahead and choose what's closest to you. Don't overthink it too much so you can continue to move on through the application. This is where you'll be asked about the numbers of employees that you have. And getting back to the question Lucy raised for us earlier, your contractors do not count as employees. They're asking for your regular employees. And the reason for that is that contractors can apply on their own as a small business. The two questions on the bottom here are often confusing for people. It will ask you how many jobs retained, and that would be the number of employees that you had on December 31st, 2020, and the number of jobs created. That would be if you created any new jobs or if you have employees who were laid off and recalled in 2020. Next slide, please.
Real quickly, the question was, can payment to independent contractors qualify as an eligible expense?
Thank you for that clarification. You can use use it for any of your regular expenses, including payroll, which may include your contractors. We've already touched on the slides and we're running short on time. So I want to move ahead to the next slide. Another tricky question is, what is your customer base? B2B, B2C, or both? That stands for business to business, business to consumer, and most nonprofits are business to consumer, B2C. On the right-hand side, those two arrows are to highlight that it is okay to to choose an unknown answer from the drop-down menu. And on the left, that second red arrow is asking you, what is your NAICS code? That stands for the North American Industry Classification System. Moving to the right, you can see if you don't know your code, some people have it in a schedule on their 990, but not everyone does. Then you can click there to find your NAICS code. And if you're still confused, please refer to our FAQs, which will walk you through how to identify your code. Next slide, please. And what we want to point out here is that you'll be asked you'll be asked that question again about, do you fall into the priority areas? And again, it's okay to say no if you don't. That middle arrow is pointing to where you'll enter the gross revenue that you had from those two periods in 2019 and 2020 for comparison purposes. And the pink questions are where you'll enter any other type of COVID relief from government sources that you received that we discussed earlier. Next slide, please. When you get to the end of this, you are at the end of part one. Part one is the only thing that you need to complete prior to the application deadline. You can go back and upload your documents at any time, but we recommend that you do that as soon as possible so Lendistry can process your application more quickly. When you get to here, you're going to be asked to type in yes and then hit submit. That's on the next slide, but you can also see that you can choose save and continue later. You don't have to finish your application all at once. You can save your work and log in later, but I will also say that you will not be given an opportunity to print out your application. So if you'd like to save your work, you need to take screenshots as you move through the application. Next slide, please. That's where we hit submit, and the next slide Once you've done that, completed part one, part two is where you upload your documents. It's pretty self-explanatory. You need to log back out of the application and then log back in, and you'll see a button to upload your document. There is a 15 megabyte limit on documents. If it's too large, either compress it if you know how, or separate it into two documents and label it, for example, 990 Part A and 990 Part B. And Lucy, we're going to turn back to you. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Is there any change in the amount of chances an applicant has if they apply early in the round versus late in the round?
Every application will be considered in every round. You don't get an advantage by applying earlier rather than later. And in fact, I often recommend people to wait a couple of days after the beginning of a funding round. Sometimes the website gets a lot of traffic and it can be a little slow.
Great, thank you. And then with regard to gross revenue, we have a question about restricted funds. So if restricted funds make the amount go over the 2.5 million threshold for the round 9 applicants, is there something they can do about that, or can they still apply?
I wish that there was something to be done about that, but unfortunately, Lendistry will only look at the 2019 gross revenue. We know sometimes people get pass-through funds or capital campaign funds or endowment funds that they have to report at that time. And if it puts you over the cap, I'm afraid that you would not be able to qualify for a grant.
Okay. We have an applicant who has completed their initial application and has gotten a notification from Lendistry that they need their article of incorporation. Can they still just send that article of incorporation now, or do they need to start over with a new application?
You do not need to start over with a new application. However, if you log in and you see that your status says not selected, you need to call Lendistry and ask them to reopen the application. They will do that. Once the application is reopened, you can log back in and upload any missing documents.
Okay, and then a kind of a similar question, an applicant that just looked in their junk mail and found an old email from Lendistry dated in June that they were still missing some items in their application. Is it too late to submit these documents now, or should they submit a new application? What should they do?
You should not submit a new application. You should return and check your status. And again, if it says not selected, contact Lendistry and ask them to reopen the application. They will do that. And then you can go ahead and supply any missing documents.
Okay. Can an individual authorized by the organization apply if they are not on the Secretary of State form?
Well, the short answer would be you can, but it will not be a qualifying application. You have two options under those circumstances. You can either update your statement of information, or you can choose someone who's listed as one of the principals to be your applicant. I will note, however, that you don't need to provide that person's email address. So let's say it was maybe one of your board members, but you have a development director who's going to be doing all the work of the application. You can list the board member as the applicant, and you can put in the development director's email address, and that way you'll make sure that you'll see all the correspondence.
We have a question about the Secretary of State form. Is that the same as the RRF-1?
It is not. The RRF-1 is provided, I believe, to the Attorney General's office, and you file your statement of information with the Secretary of State.
And then could you just again say what kinds of organizations qualify for the arts and culture round and how you can find that out?
You can find that out by going to our FAQs on our website. It will identify the organization's NAICS codes, the NAICS codes. There are certain codes that are called out in the regulations as those who are eligible to apply for the funds in round 8. And if you fall under one of those NAICS codes, you can go ahead and apply. If you don't fall under one of the round 8 NAICS codes, go ahead and apply for round 9.
Wonderful, thank you. And again, can you clarify what not selected means?
Not selected means that your application has been denied. And you want to find out, if you have a question about that and want to find out why, you need to look at any emails you have from Lendistry. Sometimes they send out an email that has a long list of possible reasons, and they have bolded the one that applies to you. So if you don't see that email, or it's not in bold, then you can go ahead and give a call to Lendistry at their helpline and ask them the reason for their denial. If you don't understand that, or you think it's an error, feel free to get in contact with me.
Okay, and then just one more question. I see we're running out of time. If the application is approved, what's the turnaround time to find out and to get the funds?
We don't know yet what the final time will be. Lendistry has not provided us with that. We have been told to expect that application processing will happen through the fall. They'll be processing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of applications, and it just does take some time. When you are notified that you are to be funded, it can take several weeks for those funds to hit your bank account.
Great, that's all the questions.
Next slide, please. Here we've got some resources for you. Once again, you can find out more at our website, CalNonprofits.org, or the CaliforniaReliefGrant.com, which is particularly useful for small businesses. Next slide, please. I want to thank my colleagues, Jan and Lucy, and all of our staff who are on the call today, as well as our interpreters and closed captions. Next slide, please. And we can't give you those resources too many times, but again, you can find all of this in the FAQs on our website. And if Jan is still here with us, I'll go to the next slide and let her talk about all the wonderful things that CalNonprofits does one more time.
Thanks. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Lucy. And thanks again to, as Sue mentioned, to our Spanish language interpreters, our tech support today. Just, one of the reasons that we can bring you things like this for free is because of California Nonprofit, our association's 10,000 members. And in addition to kind of helping to support this kind of work, being a member also gets you access to our insurance programs, like our health insurance for employees has more than 25,000 nonprofit employees already, to directors and officers insurance, all kinds of other insurances, savings on things like rental cars, hotels, office supplies, things like that. So I'm hoping that you will, whether before you apply or after you apply, to consider becoming a member of CalNonprofits. And best of luck to everybody. And don't forget that there is more help available, and hoping to see all of you on the list of people that get grants in round 8 and 9. So thank you, everybody, and goodbye.